Hi, this is Bob from Hobby Concepts, and today I've got a video on some of my top building tips. Now, I've got a partially built grand hauler here, but what I wanted to do is put some of these tips all in one place. If you've been watching my videos for a while, you probably have seen everything in this video at one point or another. Well, you might pick up a few tips, but anyway, this video is designed for people who are building their first truck and to get you over some of the humps that I see. I keep seeing the same mistakes in trucks that people built, so I wanted to point those out so you don't do them, and throw in a couple other things. So I think there's about 14 tips on this video. I'm going to call it top 10. And I know it's been a long time since I've done a video. I've been super busy, just slammed. Plus I've been out of the country a couple times. So starting in like mid-November, I should be back on a regular rotation with a whole bunch of new videos. So I appreciate you guys hanging in there. Thank you very much for subscribing and watching the channel. So let's dive in to top 10 build video tips. Let's get started. So as I mentioned, I've been wanting to do this video for some time to put a lot of my building tips in one place so they're easy to find. So today we're going to talk about my building tips for Tamiya semi-trucks. Now these tips are going to apply to virtually every single truck. So I want to start out with, and if you've watched my videos for a while, you have seen all these, but I want to get them in one spot. My first thing is talking about the parts bags. Now some of the kits, like the Grand Hauler, go by steps. So you open parts bag A for the first several steps, and when you open it, you get a bunch of little screws. Okay, my first tip is a muffin tin. Okay, that way you can take these bags and dump them in here. And now notice, this is just bag A, but there's a bunch of little bags in there. And you can dump them in here, and then you can have all the parts for step A in one place. It won't roll around in your bench. They won't get in the carpet monster, because if you drop a screw in the carpet, you will probably never see it again. And so my first tip is get a muffin tin or a couple of them and use them to dump your parts into, so they're handy for that particular step. Now the way I do it is, when I build the truck, I'll build step A. There's always some screws left over. Tamiya gives you some extras, and then I will consolidate those into here, and then when I do bag B, I'll do the same thing, consolidate the parts, and I'll have all my leftover parts in one spot at the end, and the larger parts I throw into a muffin tin. But tip number one, a muffin tin, excellent way to keep the parts from rolling around on your bench. Alright, tip number two, screwdrivers. Okay, this is kind of a big deal, and a lot of people don't realize it. This is a Craftsman Phillips head screwdriver, and it is not the right screwdriver for these kits. These kits use a screwdriver called JIS, which is Japanese Industry Standard. Okay, they have kind of a funky tip. It's squared off at the end. It has actually flat flutes, and the American ones, the flutes are kind of curved in between them. And there's two different sizes. Now, an easy way to do this is to get the Tamiya screwdrivers, although Tamiya, sadly, they're always out of them. I mean, right now I've got these in stock, and these are on back order. Tamiya also makes a really slick little toolkit that has the correct screwdrivers in it, but again, it's been on back order for 3 or 4 months. Tamiya, come on, get your act together on the tools. But you can find JIS screwdrivers anywhere, and the kit screws fit JIS screwdrivers perfectly. Okay, now the Tamiya ones have magnetic tips, which I personally like. I also have screwdrivers that I use that do not have magnetic tips, but are JIS, so sometimes I don't want a magnetic tip. Most of the time I do. So, tip number two here, use the right screwdrivers. It's a big deal. All right, tip number 3, really not a tip, more of a what in the heck is this thing? I get this question all the time. It is a holdover from the ancient days of RC when transmitters and receivers had antennas. And it is designed, you'll find a little metal part in the kit to stick right here and be an antenna. And in the old RC days, we had receivers like this, which had long antennas. They were designed to go all the way down the fuselage of an airplane. Okay, it's long. And so it's designed to slide the antenna up and be an antenna for the truck. Look at this good old radio with this great antenna. Oh my gosh. Okay, relive the glory days with that, but we don't use them anymore, so you can throw this away or keep it for you know, purposes of saying, oh wow, I know what that is. But anyway, they still include this with every kit. A lot of people ask me, what's it for? That's what it's for. So, not really a tip, but kind of a tip. You can toss this thing. Now, the hole left over, unfortunately, most of the new kits, they don't put a spot like here for it. They make a little bracket that comes with the kit to hold it up here. You can fill that if you want. You can sand it off and fill it. On the newest kits, well, on some of the kits like the Grand Hauler, comes with a little plug that's designed to plug this from the backside. I never bother with filling them because it's really difficult to get it perfectly smooth. So do with it as you will, but that's what that's for, and that's what that's for. Okay, the next several tips I'm going to talk about are in the transmission. And there are things that I see that people do wrong over and over again. So I've seen them more than once. So that's why I want to talk about them. I do have a how to build the transmission video that I think is pretty good, but there's still a couple things you have to take note of. So this is tip number 4. Tip number 4 is, this is the upper gear shaft. And no secret here on how it assembles, but this gear uses a brass bushing that pushes in, and then it fits on like this. Now, it does not fit like this. Okay? The gear goes first, and then the bushing. Alright? Very, very important, because if you assemble it backwards and you bolt the transmission together, you'll think it's working, but what happens is the gear is now moved. You can see this stands off here. The gear is moved this way. It drags on the case and binds the transmission. So I see this often where this is backwards. People say, hey, my transmission doesn't work right, and I'll see the video. The gears aren't lined up perfectly. It's easy to spot once you know what to look at. So tip number 4, get this gear on properly. All right, tip number 5, glue the bearings in the slider. Now, the kit comes with bushings. I always replace them with ball bearings. On some of the kits, like the Grand Hauler, they say don't replace these bushings with ball bearings. I always do, but I always glue them. Okay, the bearings don't fit quite as tight in the, and I'm going to use a medium CA here, if I can get it out. There we go. And why is it important to glue the bearings in this part when you don't glue them anywhere else on the whole truck? I'll tell you why here in a second. Now, I always use ball bearings. You know, some people ask. I use them. You can do whatever you want. The ball bearing kits come with the ball bearings. I've never had a problem with them. I like ball bearings, but you must glue them. All right. Why must you glue them? It's because this not only rotates, but it slides in and out. Okay? So it will pull the bearings. It'll pull them right out, especially ball bearings because they don't fit as tightly. If you glue them, no problem. but they must be glued. So that is tip number, what, 5? Glue the bearings. All right, tip number 6, still inside the transmission. On this end of the transmission, we drop a washer on here, and then this bushing fits on. Now, here's a tip. There's a snap ring slot here, and you think, oh, something's wrong, it doesn't line up. What did I do wrong? Guess what? No snap ring goes here. Okay, if you look at the directions, I know that's not super popular, but you look at the directions, you will see there is no snap ring on that upper slider. So don't attempt to put one on there. Grind the gear down or something. If a part doesn't fit on a Tamiya kit, it's because you're doing something wrong. Okay? Because the parts all fit. If you think you have to file or grind or do something on a Tamiya kit, then something's not assembled correctly. This kit's been around for a long time. Okay, so no snap ring goes in there. Okay, final tip on the transmission, we'll call this tip number 7, is to test it. Now you'll notice I haven't greased the gears yet. I do that after I put it together. I learned a long time ago. It keeps my hands much cleaner. But test the transmission. The way I do it is with a single D battery, which I've had for a long time. It still works just fine. I make sure the transmission runs, and I make sure it shifts. You can look at the output shaft and see if it goes slower or faster. But yes, this one runs and shifts fine with no grease on it. That way you made sure that you don't have too much tension here on this gear. You can see what I was talking about earlier about how this upper gear has to line up, and that little bushing goes this way. And all the gears line up and everything looks good. All the shift dogs are in, but that's tip number 7. Test the transmission before final assembly and installing it in the truck. Okay, tip number 8. Tip number 8, differentials. This is not really a building tip as much as an optional tip. Because these differentials go together pretty good, and I do have a video on how to build the rear ends. This is how to lock up the diffs. Now occasionally you might want to build a truck that has locked diffs. I rarely do this because most of the trucks I build are designed for use on the street, but if you're running in the dirt or something and you want to lock it, this is your secret weapon, silly putty. Used to play with this when I was a kid. You just stuff the diff with silly putty instead of grease. Great thing about it is the little shock absorption to the gears, they won't break, and later if you wanted to remove it you can take it out. So good old silly putty is the best way to lock up a diff. Now you can also use hot glue, which also is relatively easy to pick out later, but for locking diffs, silly putty. Okay, tip number 9, installing the rear axles. This is where I actually see more issues than any place else, even the transmissions. You have to install these correctly or the truck won't work. So, here's what you do. There are bumps on top of the transmission. I guess that's the differential, on top of the differential. And those bumps aim towards the chassis. Okay, they're bump stops. Now on this Grand Hauler, there's actually little rubber stops here that they hook to. So what we do is we'll install this so the bumps are facing the frame. And I'm going to go ahead and stick one of these on just for fun. Now, I've already put some thread lock in that. So our little stops line up nicely. Okay, and I'll go ahead and install those other 2 bolts later. Now, here's the trick. We've got our bumps here on this front differential, and they have to face the frame, but, okay, we can install it either way, and that's the secret. So what we want to do is we want to install it with these bumps facing the frame, and with the diff on the opposite side from the rear. So you got a diff here and a diff here. And I'll show you in a little bit why that's so important. And I see this all the time. So, and I've done it myself. Sometimes because I've been in a hurry and I just screwed up, and sometimes, like the first truck I built, I didn't actually know and I got it wrong. And so a lot of these things I've learned by experience. Come on, get in there. There we go. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and put the rest of these bolts in, put the rest of the suspension together, and I'll show you why that's so important. Here's why it's important to get these installed correctly. Because now, when you turn it, both of these turn the same direction. If, for example, this was turned around, they would turn like this. And the truck won't go when they turn like that. If you put this in the right direction, but have it upside down, in other words, the bump stop's facing us, it'll do this. So you have to install these with the bump stops down and the diffs at opposing. The easiest way is to install the rear first and then put this one opposite. So these are turning the same direction. There's my test. There we go. All right, tip number 8, painting tip. Note these aren't in any particular order. They're just however I decided to do them. So painting tip. All right, this is metallic orange, which is the color I'm going to paint this truck. Now oftentimes metallic colors, no matter what brand they are, tend to be transparent. So, you know, some people will throw on several coats to make it look right. But what I prefer is on this is a rear fender, I primered it, and then I painted it silver before I paint the metallic color on the top. Now what that does is that makes the colors really pop. This metallic orange, mica red's another good example. Green, they're metallic green. You need to paint them over silver. Now you don't need to, you can paint them over the primer, but the colors pop a lot better when you paint them over silver or white or something like that. Also, you can change the colors a little bit. For example, if you wanted this to be a dark orange, paint this black and then paint it, or just leave it gray. And the color will come out differently. You can test the colors on a little piece of plastic or something. That's my tip, silver first. So tip number 9 is just a tip for better building. And that is when you cut out parts, use a pair of side cutters that are flat on one side. And I'm using my old side cutters here. There's still a little bump on the part. Okay, so take an X-Acto knife, a sharp one, and just clean that off. You can use a sanding stick like a fingernail file also. I find an X-Acto knife works best for me. And just clean that up wherever the part was hooked onto the sprue, and you'll get a much nicer looking model. Now also, Tamiya, this fuel tank here, we'll clip this out, does some things with their chrome parts particularly, but actually with a lot of their parts, that the sprue actually, instead of hooking to the side of the part, it goes in and bends down on the part. And so when you cut it off, it leaves a bump, I hope you can see it here, that you need to trim off or the parts don't fit correctly. So you have to kind of watch that, especially on chrome parts, but it's not just chrome parts, it's all parts. chrome parts particularly. So if we take this tank and we try to put it together, it won't fit because these bumps prevent it from going down. So I cut them off with my screw cutter, trim them up with a knife, and all is good. So it's always a good idea to test fit the parts too. Alright, so now we've got those cleaned up, and now our tank halves fit together with no gap. So tip number 9, clean up those sprue marks on your pieces for a better looking model. I'm going to do a couple more kind of tips on just making your model nice. Alright, tip number 10, chrome parts. Tamiya has a lot of chrome parts in their kits. Wheels, fuel tanks, visors, all kinds of things. Sometimes you don't want chrome parts. You might want the wheels to be black or white or something else. You might want these tanks that go on top of the steps. You might want the fuel tanks painted. I've done a lot of different things. So how do you paint them? Well, if you paint right over the chrome, it doesn't stick very well. So I always strip the chrome, and the way I do that is I use Super Clean, which I get at Walmart, and I use a bread pan. You can see this bread pan has a lot of parts stripped in it. So we'll just dump some Super Clean in here. Try not to get it all over my bench. Okay. We'll throw the chrome parts. I got a visor, and I got these tank pieces. And we'll just dump them in there, and we'll let them sit for. I like Super Clean because it's not so caustic that it wipes out your hands. We'll let them sit in there for a couple hours or overnight or whatever works for you, but a couple hours is usually enough to get the chrome off. And stripping chrome, the trick with things like clipping the sprue pieces and cleaning up the parts before you paint them, stripping the chrome, is to make your model just a little different than everybody else's. And that's a cool thing to do, and it's really pretty easy. So we'll see what these look like when they're done. Alright, so it's about 4 hours later, and you can see that the chrome is completely gone. Sometimes you have to let them sit a little bit longer. It just depends on the part. And you never know what color plastic's going to be underneath it with Tamiya. So that's how you strip chrome off of plastic parts. It's very easy. Now, one other little tip. People ask me about stripping paint. No, this won't strip paint, but if you want to strip paint, soak them in the parts in .3 brake fluid. So there you go, stripping chrome. Alright, tip number 11. Tip number 11. This applies to the Grand Hauler only, although it's a good reminder for every Tamiya kit that sometimes you got to be really careful with the instructions. Okay, so this is the steps on the Grand Hauler, and they have this little box that fits on top of the step, or this little tube. And here's the thing, it fits both ways. And the reason it fits both ways is because they need to be able to have the same parts work on both sides of the truck. So you could actually screw it on like this just fine. Everything lines up, the screws fit, it'll go on. But here's a problem. See how this is sticking back? Okay, turn it around. It's not sticking back. Okay, if you build it wrong, which is very easy to do, I've done it. If you build it wrong, it moves the step back a little bit and the exhaust won't fit. So I'll have people asking me, hey, my exhaust doesn't fit. I can't get it on there. What did I do wrong? Well, that's what you did wrong, is you got these tubes on backwards. So again, this tip applies to the grand hauler, but it's a good reminder on any Tamiya kit. If something's not fitting, then you probably did something wrong, because on this kit, it's been around for a long time, everything fits. This is a good little reminder to get that the right direction. So tip number 13 is glues. Now, here's the glues I use and where I use them. So the first glue is Tamiya plastic cement, extra thin plastic cement. This glue you use to glue plastic parts together, for example, the seat to the seat base. The way it works, it has a little applicator brush in here, and the way it works is it actually melts the parts together. So it doesn't work good on chrome parts, it doesn't work good on parts that are painted, but for other plastic parts it works fantastic. I use a lot of it. Of course, building plastic models I use it too. So that's the first glue. Second glue, and again, if you've watched my videos for any length of time, you've heard me talk about micro crystal clear. I get this from Amazon. It's a PVA glue, and I use this to glue clear parts. Now, one thing about Tamiya plastic cement, since it works by basically melting the plastic, if you use it on clear parts, it crazes them, which means the plastic just turns into little spider webs. Micro crystal clear doesn't do that. It dries perfectly clear. So I use it whenever there's a clear part or a chrome part, and it works really good. So for example, gluing the caps on fuel tanks, I'll use it. Gluing in the light lenses, that type of thing. Okay, that's an important glue and a good one. CA glues, medium and thin. Medium I use for things like gluing the bearings in the transmission and a lot of other little oddball jobs wherever you need some glue. Thin I use for gluing the tires to the wheels, and just a little drop on each side. And then finally E6000. Now this is a sticky, clear glue. It's goopy. Stuff's awesome. So I use it for gluing rubber parts like the little rubber suspension stop bumpers on the bottom of the grand hauler. But I use it for a lot of other things because it sticks good to everything. For example, I'll be cutting little plastic parts to put inside the body, maybe to hold wires or something. I'll use it for that. I'll use it to glue fabric down or anything else. It's a fantastic stuff. It comes in both clear and colors, so I only use clear. So that's another great glue to use. So E6000, medium CA, thin CA, Tamiya extra thin plastic cement, and micro crystal clear gives you all the glues you need. So this is just for illustration. My final tip, I guess this is tip number 14, is don't go crazy with your first build. I hear it all the time. Guys will watch a bunch of videos and they'll say, oh man, I'm going to build a grand hauler and I'm going to stretch the frame to 3 feet long and I'm going to add 600 lights and all remote couplers and tons of aluminum parts and on and on and on. And what'll happen is about 6 months later there'll be a half-finished truck for sale. So here's my suggestion. On your first truck, just build the truck. Don't add a bunch of parts. I know that my videos show all kinds of cool things. But the great thing about Tamiya kits is they're bolted together. I mean, 8 screws take the body off. So you can add multifunction units later. You can take off the plastic tanks and add aluminum tanks. You can take off the plastic wheels and add aluminum wheels. You can do it later. So on your first truck, my number one best suggestion is build the truck, build it the way it comes, figure out how everything works, get it running, drive it around, have a good time, and then on your second truck, because you probably will build a second truck, you can go crazy with options, or you can take your first truck and you can start to add things. You can add a remote coupler, you can add a light bar, you can add lights, you can add sound. It's easy to do even after the trucks have been built. And I know trucks that have been painted 3 or 4 times that, you know, I'm going to change the color. It's easy to get overwhelmed on your first build. So build the truck stock and have fun with it, and then start adding things later. This multifunction unit is an example of something you can add later, or Buyer, which is even more quality stuff, Buyer sound, and all those things. So there you go. That's kind of some of my top building tips for Tamiya trucks. I wanted to get them all in one place, as I said at the beginning. So when people call me and say my transmission doesn't work, I can say, watch this video, and they'll say, oh, I did that wrong. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed this. I'm sorry it's been so long between videos. This winter we'll crank out a whole bunch. So you know, subscribe, give me the thumbs up, keep in there, guys. I know it's been a little short on videos lately, but it's because I've been so darn busy. So anyway, thanks again for watching. We'll see you next time.